Thank you. What we will be covering today. So myself and Naomi, we're going to provide a brief overview of the research piece, Born into Music, Locked Out of Power. I'm then going to introduce the wonderful panellists that we have in attendance today, who represent a brilliant cross-section of the UK grassroots music network, music industry and academia. After that, we're going to open up to a live Q&A. So both questions and reflections are very much encouraged. Like Sam says, throughout the session, please feel free to use the chat function to drop in thoughts and questions, and then the team will pick these up during the Q&A section. And then at the end of the session, we will share a small evaluation poll because we're very data-driven here. And we'll draw the session to a close at midday. Just tap the presentation, Sam. Brilliant, thank you. So, Born into Music, Locked Out of Power. It's youth music's first research piece focused on the experiences of the global majority community. And by global majority, we mean people who are Black, Brown, African, Asian, dual heritage, Indigenous to the global South, and or have been racialized as ethnic minorities. And globally, these groups represent approximately 80 to 85% of the world's population. And it's a term that was born in London in the early 2000s from the mind of the education and leadership expert Rosemary Campbell-Stevens. So we framed this piece as both a celebration because it reflects what a lot of us experience, how music connects us to our family, our friends, our wider community and home, and that's home in many senses, but it's also an interrogation because it is another light shone on some systemic barriers that can prevent young Black and Brown creators from accessing music and monetizing it. So what we want to do today is very much to create a solutions-focused space in light of the issues that the report raises. We're going to be exploring what works in creating an inclusive and empowering environment where curiosity and talent is nurtured. Next clip, please, Sam. So today, we're very much grounding our discussion in facts and lived experience. And as a brilliant colleague of ours, Amar Bhatt, who's a culture and anti-racism educator, says, lived experience is data. Our stories are records, and we are dealing in truth. And finally, it's just worth noting that some of the data that we narrate will be as a comparison between the sort of broader global majority sample to white communities or to the average. So global majority, again, the majority of the world, there are many, many different cultures and backgrounds encompassed within that term. And we recognise that any large grouping term is not meant to be perfect and can't really hold much nuance, and especially when it comes to outdated terms such as BAME and ethnic minority. The collective, I think, journey of decolonising language and narrative is far from over. So I say all of that to say, all of our experiences aren't the same. We're not a monolith. This isn't a sort of binary set of experiences that we're trying to platform here. But for today, when we or I say we and our, it's very much in a loving and celebratory way and in solidarity. Next slide, please, Sam. One of my favourite aspects of this research is how it demonstrates that music is saturated in our lives from the moment that we're born. So music is foundational. So starting off looking at sort of early childhood and the home and the impact of the family. 2 out of 3 parents from the global majority are musical compared to the average of 49%. And they're also more likely to be making music across socioeconomic backgrounds compared to white parents. 77% of parents believe it's important for their children to listen to music that is part of their family's cultural heritage, compared to 60% of white parents. And the majority, 72%, believe it's important for their child to learn an instrument. And outside the home, and for some very much an extension of home, global majority households are more likely to engage with community-based musical experiences, such as festivals and in places of worship. Next, please, Sam. So moving to school-age experiences, and this is where we found some really revelatory insight from our Sound of the Next Generation report from 2024. There's a very clear story about this age group. Young Black and Brown children are more likely to enjoy going to school, enjoy music lessons, and other activities that involve music. But they're less likely to feel that school makes music feel important. Despite this disconnect between education and nurturing the child, throughout their school years, global majority children maintain their musical identity to a stronger extent than their white counterparts. Next, please, Sam. And finally, we have this picture of the sort of early career starters, the young adults, and their perspective of working within music. And between the ages of 6 and 17, so sort of educational years, broadly speaking, the majority of children and young people feel like they have the same opportunities as everyone else. And that's across ethnic background and class in terms of intersectionality. But there's a dip in agreeing with that statement as they emerge into adulthood. And that dip is far steeper for the global majority compared to their white counterparts. And I'm sure that we can all ruminate on the various societal factors that can lead to this attitude shift. But despite this, over a third of early career starters from the global majority can see themselves in a music industry job in the next 10 years, compared to 24% of white young people and an average of 28%. They're less likely to feel that people from a cultural background are fully represented in leadership positions. And this is at a very pivotal moment when they're looking at the industry, the variety of pathways and roles and ways to be in the music industry. In fact, nearly half of respondents from the global majority deemed a lack of representation by role models to be a barrier, which is over double the level amongst those from a white background. So what does it mean to feel represented? 85% of those from the global majority background who feel represented believe a career in music is achievable, compared to only 59% amongst those who feel unrepresented. So it means a lot, and we'll touch on that later. Next slide, please, Sam. I'm going to hand over to Naomi. I feel generationally unqualified to explain what's going on here. So over to you.
Morning, everyone. I'm Naomi. I'm the Insights Assistant at Youth Music. So thank you for attending today's exchange session. So we're going to just start off with a short quiz this morning, just to get all our brains working and get the research fresh in everyone's mind. So a pop-up window with the quiz questions will appear, and you'll have about 10 seconds to answer each of them. So if you could just start with the first question, please, Sam. Okay, so question 1. What does the report say about the role of global majority communities in the UK music? A, they mainly influence niche genres. B, they are foundational to modern UK music. Or C, their influence is mostly historical. Or D, the impact is overstated. Okay, we'll just move on to the answers now. So the answer for that question is B, they're foundational to modern UK music. The report quotes that music isn't just influenced by a global majority. Modern music exists because of it. We should celebrate the sounds of the diaspora as it has shaped the music we listen to today. There's no Beatles without Little Richard, no disco without Chicago House, no jungle or UK garage without reggae and dancehall. Okay, we'll just move on to the next question, please, Sam. Okay, so question 2. What best explains why global majority young people remain underrepresented in music industry leadership despite strong participation at entry level? A, is it because of lack of interest in leadership roles? B, an insufficient musical talent or ambition? C, systemic barriers that prevent progression into senior roles? Or D, limited availability of junior level opportunities? Cool, we'll just move on to the answers now. So the answer for this one is systemic barriers that prevent progression into senior roles. The report shows that Black, Asian, and ethnically diverse representation peaks at lower career levels in apprentice and intern positions and decreases at senior levels. Subsequently, research shows that 29% of people from the global majority background feel they are fully represented in leadership positions compared to 53% from a white background. Why is it that career progression of young people from the global majority is stunted? We'll be exploring this further in today's panel discussion, where we'll also have a Q&A question. Feel free to drop your questions in the chat throughout. Okay, we'll just go on to the third question. So question 3. What is one thing all the young people featured and born into music have in common? A, they're all trained through musical education. B, they all discovered music independently online. C, their musical identity was nurtured through family, culture, and community spaces. Or D, they all began their careers through the commercial music industry. If we just reveal the answers for this one, please, Sam. Okay, so the answer is C. The musical identity was nurtured through family, culture, and community spaces. Research from our song report found that music plays a significant role in global majority households, as 2 out of 3 parents say they are musical compared to 1 out of 2 white parents. It's a big part. We've also spoke to George the poet, who said it's a big part of the Ugandan diaspora. Music carries so much experience, and for many of our young people grew up in different society and have all of their life and their memories and friends somewhere else. Music has been that connector, which echoes interviews like Anandita, Laura, Kasim, and Serena, who share how their culture shaped their musical identity. Okay, and for the final question, question 4. According to George the poet, why is representation alone not enough to address inequality in the music industry? A, is it because leadership roles are already diverse enough? B, because cultural differences make leadership ineffective? Or C, structural inequalities continue to block progression even when representation exists? And finally, D, because young people are not interested in corporate roles. So the answer for this one is C. Structural inequalities continue to block progression even when representation exists. George the poet goes on to say, it's not enough just to have people that look like you in the boardroom or in the exec room if they're just going to make the same decisions as the people that don't look like you. To move to an equal future of senior roles in the music industry is to have those with lived experiences in executive positions and those motivated in the interest of the communities that serve us. George also says that he also suggests that music industry needs an ethical framework, something that doesn't just attract people that look like someone of global majority background, but those who have demonstrated an understanding of the inequality in the industry. This doesn't currently exist, but youth music could be potentially building this. Michelle will speak further on the Industry Connect Coalition, which has a big link here. Thank you for my quiz, everyone.
Thank you, Naomi. Next slide, please, Sam. And I have the delight of introducing our panelists that we have in attendance today. So starting from the top left, Natasha Hendry has 30 years experience working in the mainstream music industry as a professional vocalist. As an academic and researcher of music and psychology, Natasha's area of interest is diversity and anti-racism and well-being and mental health in the arts. Natasha's doctoral research has informed the development of a racially literate framework for music education. Kamali Scott-Jones is A&R Director at AWOL, working with artists like Rich 32, K1 and more. In 2022, Kamali was nominated for A&R of the Year at the Young Music Boss Awards, and in 2024, Kamali was inducted into Music Week's Roll of Honour at the Women in Music Awards. Kamali is also a founding member of the Black Music Coalition, which is an award-winning non-for-profit organisation launched in 2020 as direct response to the death of George Floyd, which breathed new life into the Black Lives Matter movement. Black Music Coalition is dedicated to eradicating the racial disparities and systemic barriers affecting Black employees and executives, including freelancers and independents across all sectors and at all levels of the UK music industry. Sophia Ahmed leads the education programme at Saffron. Saffron is a non-profit organisation dedicated to advancing gender equality in music technology, creating safer spaces for marginalised communities to learn, create and grow with confidence across DJing, music production, sound engineering and radio broadcasting. With a professional background rooted in youth and community work, Sophia brings over a decade of experience designing and delivering projects that build meaningful connections and support the development of personal and vocational skills. Tija is an artist who refuses to stick to one genre. She creates music that spans across R&B, neo-soul, jazz, reggae, jungle and beyond. With a deep-rooted love for country and reggae music, Tija brings a unique mix of sounds, each track standing on its own while showcasing her wide-ranging influences and creative freedom. Michelle is a Grants Learning Officer at Youth Music, and she's also lead officer for the Industry Connect Fund, a fund and movement focused on creating accessible pathways into the music industry. A music practitioner, freelance drummer of over 20 years, as well as producer and DJ, Michelle has toured across the UK and Europe, performing with and supporting a wide range of artists and bands across multiple genres. She also played her Glastonbury debut last year, DJing at the Rum Shack. Shout out, Michelle. And finally, we also have Jadine James joining us today in the capacity of our Next Gen Insight Generator. Jadine is a Brighton-based vocalist, currently completing her event management degree at BIM University. Besides her artistry, she is researching how music influences neurodivergent minds for her dissertation. Her professional interests include touring, technical production, diversity in the creative industries, sustainability and budgeting, with a focus on creating accessible and inclusive spaces and love experiences. So Jadine will be producing a written piece following the session today that reflects on our collective discussion and insight. Thank you. So moving on to our panel discussion. Tija, we're going to start off with you, if that's okay.
Hey everyone.
Hello. Good morning. So hearing about some of this research today, I wonder if you could just start us off. How does what you've heard compare to your experience of music education during school years?
Yeah. So for me in school, actually, let's go back to just the home. So I grew up on country and reggae music. I am half St. Lucian, so that's quite typical for a St. Lucian person outside of soca. So that's how everything started. My dad's a wonderful singer and my mum was in a band, but it was never seen as it was more like nurtured as a hobby than as a career path. So when I went to school, I actually had a really nice primary school teacher. He was called Mr. Calvert, and he really saw my music potential, let's say. And I was always at the front of choirs, and I was the main person singing, and it was all really nicely nurtured. And he encouraged my parents to get me piano lessons. Piano lessons were great until I got a teacher who only wanted to teach me ABBA songs. I was not interested. And then moving on from that in secondary school became really hard. So obviously my parents had already said to me, like, music isn't something that we don't win. We don't win. This is who we are. We don't win. We can't do careers like that. The best thing for you to do is to go and study, some corporate thing. So I ended up actually doing a law degree. So I went to secondary school, and in secondary school, my music teacher, I think we only had music lessons every 2 weeks. I don't think it was even once a week. And my music teacher really didn't like me. I really remember my first music lesson day, like pulling my tie all the way up to my neck, just for like no reason. All the girls had little tiny ties in school, but I was always quite scared of being in trouble, so I had quite a long tie. And I remember she just screamed in my face and pulled my tie up to the top of my neck. And from that point, I was just not interested in doing music in school. I'm from Plymouth, which is actually like a really highly white demographic, and my music teacher was a classic pianist, and a lot of her sessions were around like musical theatre and just very classical stuff. Outside of one session, I remember we were using African drums, and I was excluded from the session because I was wearing a skirt that day. So music wasn't really something that was nurtured in secondary school, but despite all of this, I always sang. No matter what, I always sang. And my parents let me sing in pubs and things like that, even from a young age. They always nurtured that. But like I say, it was always a hobby. It was never a career path. I didn't even know that you could go to uni and do music or learn music production. That was not even of knowledge until I moved back to Bristol for the second time about 3 years ago, and when I decided that music was something that I wanted to do properly and I wasn't going to give up. So then I moved into electronic music. I felt like safe in that environment, but singing with jungle and anything EDM really, I recognised that my voice wasn't really seen and heard there, despite like we've said before in the research, there's no jungle without reggae and dancehall, but I just didn't feel like I was really being, like, I was very visible in those spaces. So I decided to start making soul and reggae and R&B, and that felt really good. And that's when I got picked up from Saffron's artist development program. And it was then, that was the moment where I felt truly looked after in music, being around Black women mainly, and non-binary people was where I really flourished in music and believed that I could do this, and I can learn how to produce, and I can perfect my performance, and I'm allowed to be in spaces that I can take up space in spaces. So yeah, I would say that is my story and kind of the way it kind of flows. So school wasn't good. Everything outside school around people of colour was the main point of my making music, wanting a career in music and feeling that it's achievable. Yeah.
Brilliant, Tija. Thank you so much. And I'm sure we're all really glad to hear that you found that caring community environment through Saffron. So thank you so much.
Yeah, they're great. They're amazing.
Well, we'll speak to Sophia in a moment, and I'm sure she'll expand on what makes those sort of spaces work. But before then, Natasha, we've heard about the research along with Tija's experience. I wonder if you could touch on how these findings compare to current research in this area.
Yeah, I mean, the report really reveals some important truths about what's going on. And, the strapline for today is looking at some of the systemic and structural issues. And that is a picture of where the research has moved on. I think historically we've been given this sort of deficit model, somehow sort of fed the idea that perhaps young global majority people just aren't that interested in pursuing music, but the research very clearly is substantiating now what we know, that isn't true, but there are these systemic issues that are in the way. And I think the first thing, just to say, listening to Tija's really powerful story, what's so tragic about that is it so closely mirrors my own experience. And I'm a lot older than Tija. And what is so tragic about that is that things haven't really moved on. They haven't really changed. And that's one of the things that really encouraged me to do some research when I went back to education as a mature student and saw that these issues are still happening. And so really just to say what the research is showing us now is that this misrecognition actually of the musicalities of global majority young people is beginning in education. And that's where it begins. And it then filters through to the industry and to future careers and what musical lives and futures might look like. And what we know is really that musical identities are not nurtured, that global majority musical identities aren't nurtured within formal music education. They're not recognised, and probably more accurately, I'd say they're not welcomed within formal music education contexts. And that has a very real knock-on effect. What it's actually doing is perpetuating a cycle of unchange, is what I call it. Because at the same time, what Tija really very beautifully articulated is that so many global majority young people are having to go around formal music education in order to find their people, to find their music valued, to have their talents nurtured. They have to bypass the formal education system, and as has been shown in the Youth Music Report, really look to community, to family, to our cultural experiences to have that nurtured and recognised. Because we're finding there is a real dominance of music that is outside anything other than a very white ideology, a colonised picture, classical music, as valid as that is. And let's also be clear that there is a Black experience within classical music, and we need to recognise that and make room and normalise that too. But it has a dominance, and it is legitimised as what is properly academic. And when other musics aren't, what that means is people are swayed away from the content that's in music. They are then very much swayed away from taking exams, because a lot of exam content, and we're looking at GCSE and A-level, is very Eurocentric, it's very classical. And if that is not your interest or where you have experience, then you don't even try for it. And the result of that is that we are then having people that are less qualified with music degrees, and we are basically having an increasingly white middle-class music education workforce. And that perpetuates this cycle of misrecognition. So there's not people teaching global majority young people that have anything outside of that experience. And things like this have been substantiating, for example, the Black Lives in Music report in 2021. We know that out of the music professionals that were included and consulted in that report, 73% of white music professionals had a music-related degree in the UK, compared with only 43% of black music professionals. So that's having a real knock-on effect with this cycle. But I do, at this point, before we move on to someone else, want to be very clear. It's not just about that systemic issue of a lack of qualification. In the same report, in the Black Lives in Music report, they showed that 57% of black music creators saw their white counterparts promoted ahead of them, despite having the same qualifications. And so I do want to bring it in at this point, something that is often swayed away from and a bit uncomfortable, but the systemic issue of racism is a really big thing that we can no longer avoid, and we have to put it on the table and see what institutions, education included, where that features. So there are issues of not being qualified, but at the same time there are issues of misrecognition and not legitimizing, I think, black musical identities. I know today is about an exchange and talking about ways forward and solutions. And I think I just wanted to end with 3 things that I feel we need to look at and start to address to move towards solutions. I'll be interested to take any questions as well at the end. But for me, one of the big things is looking at a redistribution of power. We know, like, again, was articulated in the youth music report, that there's this like bottlehead of there's black representation early careers and lower down, but it's just not filtering up to senior positions. And understanding the legacy of colonialism and how that keeps power in the hands of particular people is something that we can no longer ignore. So taking a decolonized approach is a really big thing for me. The other thing is taking an equitable approach, not just equal. We have to see these historical, how long this has been going on for. There's a time that actually black and global majority young people are given extra resources and extra help. No longer is it enough to say, well, let's just support everybody. But actually that equitable approach is something that's really, really needed. And the last thing I'll say is that I think we also have to become more skilled at having these uncomfortable conversations about racism and not be scared to say that word and bring that into context. Because until we start to look at those issues and not just structural racism, well, there's not qualification thing, but name what we know are the issues, then it will be very hard to move on for that. So for me, it's not just about inclusion and, as the report said, representation, but we actually need to start to racially affirm global majority young people and really centre their experiences and celebrate them. It's not just enough to include.
That's brilliant, Natasha. Thank you so much for that. Thank you, and thank you for that summary as well. Equitable, decolonising and addressing racism and naming it front on. Thank you so much. And you spoke so lovely about the sort of spaces outside mainstream education, but spaces that can legitimise experiences. So, Sophia, over to you. I think you're kind of very firmly within sort of designing and creating these spaces, and with sort of the more traditional educational sort of spaces falling short, how is your work approaching things differently to improve those pathways and to create that space for the next generation of global majority young people?
Thank you. Hello, everybody. It's lovely, wonderful to be here. Saffron, I guess, so we've been going for 10 years now. And traditionally what we do is actually work with adults. So we've worked with like 18 plus, and we've never had like an age limit on that. So what's been really wonderful is that we get women in their 50s coming to us who've spent their entire life being a mother, and going, actually my kids are grown up. I've got time for myself now. This is my time to pursue music, and being able to enter our spaces and our courses and our workshops and, start that journey for themselves. And I think for us, it is all about, ultimately the main aim is about creating representation. But I completely agree with the point that George, the poet, has made in terms of, that's just not enough. But I think for us, in terms of what we're trying to achieve, obviously working, our kind of main focus is supporting women, non-binary, trans, gender expansive people. But then obviously there is the intersectionality amongst that as well. So, focusing on women from global majority backgrounds, those who are gender minorities, so do not class themselves as cisgender women, and people who class themselves as disabled or neurodiverse or have additional access needs. And, in terms of increasing the representation of those people within music, it is creating that kind of domino and that snowball effect for the younger generation. So the way in which we kind of deliver our work is by providing accessible education. And what we mean by that is, so the courses that we run, music production, DJing, sound engineering, that we start at a beginner level. So for people don't have to have any experience whatsoever, or they might have very little experience. Our courses are short term, and we generally try to run them in the evening so that people can also manage this new education alongside a job. So we'll often see that one of the things that we see within the music industry are training opportunities or free internships where you can work for a label, for example. But so how do you pay for your life whilst you're working for free every day, So that's something for us in terms of ensuring that it's accessible to people outside of their normal day lives. And yeah, like I said, kind of short-term, beginner level kind of courses that we're running. And we're actually, thanks to Youth Music, we're now kind of expanding our work, and we are going to go start working into schools. So something that we see as, a general problem with music education is it's still very old school. It's very traditional. The music industry is moving, and has already moved in a more electronic focused way. So in terms of music technology, and that's something that Saffron really wants to change within traditional music education within schools, is going in and providing more music technology focused activities, and in a way that's not about you have to have a qualification. This is about you having to choose this for GCSE to be able to go to college, to be able to go to university, although that would be great for, creating those pathways for some young people. Our approach is about being playful and experimenting and just showing young people that music can be fun and this can be a hobby for you, and maybe you might pursue it as a career later on in life. So yeah, and I guess in terms of equity, when everybody when we're doing our courses, we run it on an application basis. So everybody needs to apply to one of our courses. We do provide financial bursary places, so people have to kind of select that within the application process, and that enables us to make a fair selection process because those places are very limited in terms of choosing people, kind of at the most highest need, but also we do prioritise people from global majority backgrounds, and like I said, gender minorities as well. So for every single one of our courses, what we would love to see is at least 50. So we have about 10 people in each course, and we aim to fill at least 50%, if not more, of those places from people who are from non-white backgrounds. So for us, it is really important to provide that equity to work towards the equality we want to achieve.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And thank you for speaking about kind of meeting young people where they're at and providing them with that autonomy and the capacity to sort of determine their own journey with resource and guidance. So thank you. Kamali, we've spoken about the sort of experiences of young people and the sort of attitudes around, how they're entering the music industries. But how does this research resonate with your experiences of someone that's very firmly embedded in music industry leadership?
Morning, everyone. Thank you for letting me be here. Such an interesting conversation. The research really resonated with me actually on all levels. I think I definitely represent another side of coming from a Black household that was steeped in music, but also had representation of my parents being in and around the business. And so from a young age, I actually did have that representation and the idea that a career was possible for me in that space, which definitely shaped, you know, my career path. I did at one point think I was going to go into fashion and buck the trend, but I eventually found my way. But I think, you know, as I moved through my career and through the industry, I realized how different that is to a lot of my peers who, you know, kind of like what you said, Tija, like your parents, especially if they're coming from different countries or they've immigrated over to the UK, for instance. I think that's especially true where it feels like you've got to keep your head down and go the safer route, and music doesn't feel that way for a lot of people. And so they want you to get, you know, respected jobs that people know and understand, like a doctor and a lawyer, and, you know, have bragging rights when they go to church, which is all relevant. But my experiences in music have shown me that, you know, there's all of those same roles that can be applied. You know, you can be a music lawyer, and that is something that I would love to see more spoken about and more widely made available to young people as they come through the education system and these other youth spaces that are going to set them on their path. I guess on the other side of the research, I guess where George the poet and some of those people come in with their thoughts on it and about how we're going to change things moving forward. And Natasha put it so beautifully in your summary. So thank you for that, Natasha. But I think the main issue that I'm feeling, you know, as my day job as an A&R director, but also my work at the Black Music Coalition, is there's a certain conversation that did open up in 2020 after Blackout Tuesday and the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement on the global sort of stage. And there were more conversations being had that some were uncomfortable for some people. I rarely find them uncomfortable, but I think the pendulum has kind of swung, and I sort of look at life that way and society that way, where, you know, 5-6 years later, we're on the other side of things where, you know, you can see the kind of extreme views that are platformed from, you know, world leaders, which means that these issues are now being shrunk and kind of like, well, you had your time, you know, we spoke about it. We put you guys in some jobs for, it's roughly a 3-year cycle for us as executives as a whole. And so there was this huge influx of really respected, decorated Black executives and professionals that were inserted into some of these spaces, you know, EVP of this and, you know, director of that. And while they are more than qualified and worthy of those jobs, they don't have the same long runway that their white counterparts often do. And so it kind of brings us back to that pendulum analogy where on the other side of that, because we haven't achieved what, you know, these companies or organizations expect us to in the allotted time, which is much less than they would give anybody else, it's kind of a virtue signal that you had your chance, but now we're back to regular transmission. I really see that the lack of space and training and development that is offered to us pales in comparison, and that's in the form of mentorship, stewardship, having people to turn to. I do want to stress on that point that I think the music industry as a whole lacks that kind of formality that you might see in other industries anyway, as it is. Like recently we had this really interesting kind of event where we met the Football Association and some of their talent leaders and talent scouts, and it was really interesting to see how formalized their business is and what we could learn as the music industry from that could actually help with some of these issues. Yeah, I think it's an issue that, like Natasha aptly said, it's like, even though it feels like the platform for this conversation is not being welcomed, I think it's now that we all need to raise our voices a little higher and put it back on the table, because I fear that if we don't, we'll slip further backwards than we really should, which is not reflective of, you know, where commercial music is and what Black and majority global artists are offering on a world stage, in a pop space, you know, all of it. And so, yeah, I think what is great to see is that commercial line isn't going away. And so that is a language that, you know, these organizations and companies do understand. And so being able to be buoyed up by that is really important in moving this conversation forward.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Kamali. And I feel very energized. I feel very motivated, actually. Yeah, it's you kind of touched on it, but it's this sort of this ongoing lie of meritocracy in spaces like that, isn't it? Just people bringing people that look like each other, and it's very really the sort of, you know, we don't have the same long runway as white counterparts do, which is, yeah, an amazing kind of visual. Well, then I suppose moving on to Michelle, who can touch on, as our Industry Connects lead here at Youth Music, how you're designing a program to kind of do the work that Kamali is kind of talking to here. So, you know, how does this resonate with how you're approaching Industry Connect, and how does that coalition seek to affect change?
Yeah, I mean, welcome everyone, and hello everyone. The report first and foremost does speak a lot to me, and certainly to my experiences in the music industry, having been in it for over 20 years. I've been in it for like 35 years, basically, playing drums as a drummer, you know, being at school. Music was a firm part of my family. But yeah, I mean, I think the reason, you know, we're so passionate about it, I'm so passionate about it, is, you know, I think that, you know, music is a really pivotal part of our lives, and some people don't get to exercise that as much as others, i.e. global majority, young people, women, don't really get to kind of exercise that. And certainly with my experience of being in the music industry, I didn't really see any role models as a drummer for me back in the day. And that was pretty difficult, you know, but I still went on and did it, you know, battling against those that were, you know, playing drums is a masculine space. You don't see very many females in that space, women in that space. You don't see black women in that space back in the day, back in the times. It's got a lot better now. But, you know, I really did have to fight that. And I had to play harder. But why should I have to play harder, you know, when the space should be for everyone? And I think that, you know, certainly from my experience of playing and touring, you know, I really faced a lot of you know, people just looking at me and thinking, why are you here? And then I would play, and then they go, okay, that's why you're here. Do you know what I mean? And it's just kind of like, you know, for me, in terms of Industry Connect, you know, it's really joining up the dots basically and breaking down those barriers for young people, because the industry hasn't changed at all from when I first started. I worked at a label called Acid Jazz back in the day as well, and even then I was doing work experience. I had to do that for free whilst doing another job. Do you know what I mean? And there was, you know, for me, it was just like, it was really hard times, but I had to fight that, and I had to really keep myself open. But there wasn't anything there that helped me, do you know what I mean? Helped me to learn, or even, you know, at school, you know, showing me that there are other roles and other opportunities within the music industry that I could get into. My dad was a bass player. I played in a reggae band. You know, that was the only role model I had. But really, you know, when I was at school, no one said to me that I could be a studio engineer, or I could be, you know, sound engineer, or whatever it was, all those other different roles. And that's where Industry Connect is really important, because what it's trying to do is break down those barriers in the music industry, try to bring education with industry together, because education is a little bit uninformed about what pathways there are for young people to get into, particularly for, young people. And I think it's that, because I never get told that I could, be a drummer, or I could be, work as a sound engineer. I was just told that I could be a lawyer, so I went down that road, but actually it wasn't for me. So it's just kind of like, Industry Connect is about bringing people together, those people in the industry that are, bring us together, and having a seat at the table, having a voice at the table. You have DCMS and people like that up in government and whatnot, having conversations about how to make, pathways into the music industry, when in actual fact, we've got grassroots organisations, doing it already, and seeing artists, and trying to help artists to come through. And it's just about kind of like, we need to make sure that we prioritise at grassroots level, young people coming through, particularly from the global majority. They need support, need to be able to see role models like themselves, and that's not what we're seeing. And so that's about, Industry Connect is about breaking down those barriers. It's about having those conversations. It's about bringing the conversations into the room, those people that wouldn't normally speak, having a seat at the table. And I guess that's what Industry Connect is about. It's about a coalition that comes together to speak and have that voice at the seat of the table, because usually we don't. And I think if we do come together, then, there's a voice that is spoken for us. And at the moment there isn't. And that's what Industry Connect is about. It's about diversifying those voices at the top. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you so much. And yeah, it's something that we kind of shout about a lot at Youth Music, around combating the sort of like invisibility of the sort of diversity of roles that are available to us. I mean, Kamali mentioned kind of you can be in law, you can be in music as well at the same time, and how we don't just have to go down a path where we're kind of removing this massive aspect of us and our passions. Like, we can have it all. We can have it all. So we are now at the sort of Q&A section, but very much open to any personal reflections from people as well. If anything kind of resonates with you from your own journey that you've heard today, feel free to raise your hand or pop something in the chat. But I'm actually going to hand over in the first instance while we're just waiting for some stuff to come through. Naomi, I think you had a question for one of the panelists.
Yeah, so I have a question for Kamali. So you mentioned formalizing the music industry like the Football Association, and I just wanted to know, how can you see this being translated into the music industry?
Truthfully, I'm still working that out. It was like an insightful conversation. I didn't necessarily expect to come out with any of those thoughts, but I guess they have, there's similarities in the fact that they work with a lot of young talent, even younger than the music industry starts working with talent typically. So they're, onboarding young kids from as early as 8 years old. And so, yeah, I guess a lot of the things that stood out to me was how there was like almost a framework of how the industry is allowed to interact with those young people and their parents, and in a way that was much more protective and again formal compared to how music has historically operated. And that's not to say like there's absolutely no rules and regulations, but there's just not, it's kind of on a one-to-one basis. It isn't like a blanket way that we're expected to deal with those things. And I think in the long term, those types of things can protect everybody on all sides, whether it's the labels, the executives, the artist, and the people around them. So yeah, that's just one of the things. But I also think they seem to have a little bit more incentive to be more collaborative and mentor a little bit more. I think, over the years that has increased in music spaces, but it's more so, amazing organizations that people on this call have set up, rather than it being embedded in, the sort of infrastructure of these big companies. So yeah, there's still lots to be extracted and worked out in that arena, and it won't be easy, but I definitely think there's things that could be put in place.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much. Steve, you had a question. You can unmute yourself and we'll just move on to you.
Sure. Hi. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. No. Really, really good talk. Really insightful. Some really powerful statements and research and data. So I founded an organization with Christine Tomlinson and Clint Thompson in East One called Colab Creative. And the question that I've got is really from the organization, because we are forming at this point in time, and we've also got quite a lot of data and a huge network of artists and DJs and promoters and whatnot that we're working with. So one, I extend that invite to all, and we would also like to support some of the work that's going on here, because there's a lot of the topics that cross over. So I posted a question in there. So as a father, as a coach, as a leader of people, I am struggling with how to approach safeguarding people, making sure people are safe, making sure people at a data level are safe, that their intellectual properties are secured and things like that. We help people with their PRS and all that good stuff. But yeah, in light of some of the things that have been in the press more recently, where we can see some systemic abuses and that have been kind of meted out on certain populations, and the evident racism that is kind of bubbled to the surface, that has been kind of instituted in the film and music industries as well, and in fashion as well. We're basically facing this and seeing this, and over the past since beginning of COVID, a lot of research was done. So we'd like to share that, but my question still stands. How is there any organizations that are looking at safeguarding young people and women in light of what's happening or what's been happening since the beginning of when jazz was popular and people were getting drugged up and abused? Is there anything from that line? It was a bit of a deep question. Sorry.
Well, I mean,
I'm basically scared stiff for my daughter to go to castings. I'm scared stiff to them to talk to managers and agents. I'm like, I don't trust anybody anymore. I'm like, it's scary. And I'm working with Mark Curry in the US, and the stories I'm getting from there, the Bad Boy Records and all of this kind of stuff. I'm thinking, what's going on here? It's quite a scary time, Yeah. You're probably telling my stuff. Sorry.
Am I okay to speak?
Fire.
Yeah, no, I mean, I hear you. I mean, the music industry is not a very safe place. It hasn't been a safe place for a while. And certainly with regards to kind of what we're kind of trying to look at and do, with regards to Industry Connect, certainly with that coalition, we've been talking about safety and rights. We work with music guardians and help musicians in terms of how we can help our young people keep safe in the music industry, because we know that it isn't. And so definitely it's about being part of that conversation and having the right tools to be able to kind of have those conversations with your young people. And certainly in terms of the coalition, if you're part of that coalition, that's the type of things that we talk about. We've got an event coming up in Bristol on the 5th and 6th of March, and we'll be touching on parts of that and what has come from some of the conversations and consultation that we've been sort of having with some of the kind of industry organisations, grassroots organisations around that topic. So yeah, I hear you in terms of that for sure, and it's definitely worth being part of the coalition to kind of hear some of the conversations that have come from that, because it is about protecting our young people and just being fully equipped of how to do that. So yeah, if you want more information, we can certainly provide that for you. But yeah, I hear you on that front, and there are ways. So yeah.
They're also the similar kind of provision, because as we started this organization and we started to engage with artists, I'm having to find counselors for people, therapists. There's people who have been through things, and I'm a corporate guy, I'm corporate and street at the same time. And I've always been on the fringes of the music industry. As I've gone and started to engage directly with artists, I'm hearing horror story after horror story. You know, we've got a young man from Leighton who, producer Antonio Da Costa, he's trapped in the US right now. Yeah, we're trying to get him back home. He's been attacked by local thugs. You know, we didn't have the money to send him with security, so he's been out there working with hip hop greats, and then he's getting attacked because he's in the hood and he's black male, and they see him as a target. And how do I safeguard this guy?
Yeah,
it's mad. But yeah, fantastic.
I'll put some information in the chat about the coalition if anyone wants to kind of just look at, and see what we're trying to do about it, But I definitely think, I definitely hear you in terms of that. I think it's worth being part of that conversation to know how to equip, because these are adults going into this music industry that's not safe, but it's about how you equip them to be able to go into the music industry being aware of that. So yeah, I'll put some information in the chat so you can have a look at that.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, everyone. Apologies, I know there's one more hand raised. If I could ask, if you do have like a question, just pop it by email. And what we'll do is we'll just sort of consolidate contact details. There are some other bits of research that were mentioned today that I'm sure some people would like to delve further into. So we'll look to encompass a response and we'll send it through to attendees today. But just to make sure we wrap up so everyone can have lunch, thank you so much for joining. Sam is going to pop up an evaluation poll today. Please do just take 2 seconds to complete that. And finally, just thank you for being part of this sort of collective space where we're coming together and sharing our experiences, but also looking towards and working collectively what change we can enact in the industries. And clearly today, this cross section of music industry, I feel like we got it. I feel like we can do it. So yes, thank you so much for joining. And again, contact details and links will be shared to everyone. So have a lovely rest of your day. And thank you again. Thank you, panelists in particular.